Good afternoon. I am calling to order our special meeting of the Committee of the Whole, scheduled for today, May 26th at 12 noon, for the purpose of considering the municipal sick leave ordinance that has been proposed. My name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I am the chair of this committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Gordon, Cano, Reich, Bender, Council President Johnson, Council Member Andrew Johnson, Yang, Quincy, Warsami, Goodman, Fry, and Palmisano. And we are more than a quorum. We are the full city council, and then we have also been joined by Mayor Hodges today, so welcome. This is a meeting that is specifically to consider the ordinance language, and so we will just move into this. However, Mayor Hodges has asked if she might be able to say some words at the beginning of this meeting, and so I wanted to allow her that opportunity. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everybody on the committee for letting me speak today. I do know that you have the tough work of legislating ahead of you, and I appreciate very much that you've been doing this. And I just wanted to say a few things as you begin your deliberations about Earn Sick and Safe Time, as well, in addition to my gratitude that you are taking up the issue, which I appreciate a great deal. I proposed it last year in my State of the City address for reasons that I think are familiar to all of us at this point. We don't need to just build the workforce of the future, though we do need to do that. We also need to build the workplace of the future. It's a public health issue. There's a benefit to business. Lack of access to sick time reduces productivity, reduces morale, and leads to more job injuries. Providing sick time reduces employee turnover and, in turn, the costs associated with that turnover. And it's a broad, uniform policy that creates a level playing field for business. And it's the right thing for workers. No one should have to choose between getting paid and getting well. And that is something that we have talked about a great deal. It's also at the heart of racial equity in this city. The lack of sick time disproportionately affects people of color. 63% of white workers have access to earn sick time. Only 32% of Latino workers, 51% of African American workers, and 58% of Asian American workers do. Engagement with the community, including workers, businesses, advocates, has been comprehensive. That this is needed, that there's a reason that I proposed it, and the process on this piece has been comprehensive. The Workplace Partnership Group, comprised of workers, advocates, a range of businesses of all sizes and across many sectors, came together to bring recommendations and advice to us on this, and I appreciate their work. And the diverse group agreed on the bulk of the policy before it even got to the council today. And I want to give you all just a ton of credit for the work that you've been doing. I want to give Council President Johnson credit and appreciation for your leadership, Council President, in the development of the work of the partnership group. I want to thank the Workplace Partnership Group, especially the chairs Liz Doyle and Jim Router. I want to thank you, Council Vice President Glidden. I want to thank you. I want to thank Councilmember Bender, thank Councilmember Andrew Johnson, who've been deeply engaged in this work from before the beginning of it. And I want to thank Councilmember Fry for his work crafting final language, particularly around enforcement. I shouldn't say final work language because you guys are about to deliberate, for his work creating language around enforcement. And I want to thank the countless business owners who have taken the time to talk with me personally, some very strongly in support of the policy, others deeply not in support of the idea of the policy, although some minds have changed along the way. I took and take all of the input seriously. It's been invaluable. And I want to thank all the workers who came out and told their personal stories, sometimes at great risk to themselves or their livelihoods, to talk about the experiences that they've had, what having access to earned sick time could have given them in moments where it would have been the most beneficial. That was a risk for them to do. They took that risk, and I am grateful. And I know that there have been compromises along the way. Everybody has made compromises along the way. I know that many business owners that I talked with who already offer their employees paid time off wanted to make sure that our ordinance didn't require them to scrap their existing policies, and I agreed. So long as the business's policy meets or exceeds all of the minimum standards set, those policies, my hope and anticipation is that those will qualify under this ordinance. And I support the city taking action on this issue, and I will continue to work with businesses and workers to make sure it's implemented in a way that works for everybody. We know that this will be a big change for a lot of people if it were to pass today. I know that it will be an adjustment. In general, I know, and I've been saying for a long time with the Business Made Simple initiative and as we've moved forward, right now, and I think there have been some recent examples this week, we make it way too hard for people to invest in this city and to run their business. And the right hand needs to know what the left hand's doing in Minneapolis, and we're working on that. And having centralized place for business owners to go to get some of the assistance they need is an important project that I am looking at, and I know council members are looking at moving forward. But this experience will be unique of this Earn Sick and Safe Time. We can draw on the experience of other communities who put similar policies in place. And they're, recommended and contemplated here is a phased approach so that businesses moving forward can get the technical assistance they need, can get the education that they need before there's any enforcement that takes place, because I know that it will be an adjustment. So I appreciate very much the council taking this up today. I appreciate very much, I know the hard work that goes into getting you to a point where you can have this conversation today, and I thank everybody for the work that you've been doing and the consideration. And I look forward to, and I hope that you will pass this landmark measure for our workers and for the future of our city. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you for joining us. I also want to say thank you to the many people who have joined us here today at City Hall. I know that there are many more that are watching online at this very important meeting. I see here members of our city staff who are key to giving advice and helping us think through the work on this policy. I see members of the Workplace Partnership Group, and again, acknowledge the chair and the vice chair and many others who are here and continue to follow this work. I see members of community organizations, members of the business community, and I'm sure there are many others here. And I just want to say thank you. I know it feels a little warm in here, and so, if you need to check out and come back in, just do what you need to do to feel comfortable. This is, again, it's a committee meeting for our work, so it is not a time where we're taking public testimony. For my colleagues, I am using the speaker management, but I am going to watch. I think a couple people do not have their computers here, and so I will be watching to get folks in queue. The other thing I will say is that the clerk's office has done a great job of helping to collect amendments that they are aware of. They have organized them for us, and they've also provided a list of what are those proposed amendments. We don't need to take those in that order. I mean, traditionally, we allow people to get in queue as they wish to get in queue to make the amendments that they are going to. And of course, we may have additional items that are not on this list. So just we're conducting business as usual. And I believe our council president wanted to go ahead and move this ordinance so it is before us then for discussion and amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just really want to make a special call out before I move the ordinance to say thank you to the staff that's worked so hard on this. Just diligently and helpful, great, accurate reporting of the partnership meetings that went on, synopsis of people's comments, willingness to take on the task of enforcement, and then especially, I just really want to point out Susan Trammell, who's been the city attorney that's been drafting the work product. So thank you so much, and again, our great professional staff. They make us look good. So anyway, I'm going to move the ordinance so it is in front of us, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you for that, and thank you also for your words acknowledging the very hard work of a lot of staff that have helped us get to this point. I've actually put myself in queue. I have a set of amendments that I sent out. If you look at the packet that was put together by the city clerk, hang on. I want to just double check the pages on this. Okay, starts on page 14. Is a set of amendments that are, I would characterize them as non-substantive policy amendments. They are either technical or correcting some drafting issues. These amendments were sent out to council members. I can, if I see a nod, if you'd like me to walk through these, I'm happy to. Okay, so starting on page 14, in the title section, I have a strike through on the word paid so that the title would be known as Minneapolis Sick and Safe Time Ordinance. In the purpose section, there are several amendments in here to change the word violence, that is part of domestic violence, to abuse, to coincide more with how this is referred to in state law. In the definition section, 40.40, there are some changes to the wording on the first definition. This was to take out the word accrued before safe and sick time. And so the wording of this section would now read, sick and safe time means leave, paid or unpaid, that may be used for the same purposes and under the same conditions as section 40.220. Under that in definitions, again, domestic violence has been changed to abuse. The definition of employer following that, this was again kind of a fix to ensure that we're properly defining employer, which is one or more employees. How the ordinance applies to different sized employers is articulated later in the ordinance, and that has also been clarified, and we'll hit that as we go through. And then a small change, more of a grammatical issue in the last section of 40.40 definitions, to change an and to an or. I think that's more a grammatical issue. In 40.100, the section titled authority, in section B2, this would be, and this is describing how the director has the authority to implement and administer and enforce this chapter. This adds a phrase in B2 that they will include, including rules ensuring timely review of reports of violation. So you can see that, just again to kind of clarify some description of what will happen that has come from staff. In the next section, accrual of sick and safe time. The changes in this section, just as a general description, were to ensure that they corresponded more accurately to the recommendations that came from the Workplace Partnership Group. And we had heard about these as being important changes, both from the chair and the vice chair of the partnership group, as well as some of the business associations who were concerned that the drafting didn't reflect what they had understood had come forward from the partnership group. So that would apply to the changes in 40.210A. Again, clarifying how, in essence, an employer has the ability for the accrual of 48 hours to set the calendar year in the way that the employer typically may do, which can be a variety of ways. It can be by a January through December calendar year, an anniversary calendar year, a fiscal calendar year, but that we're not dictating how an employer chooses to do that. Then in section C, this clarified that the amount of accrual is capped at 80 hours. Again, an important clarification. The next section is 40.220, use of accrued sick and safe time. Here the change is in section, the first change is in section F. The wording would now read, An employer must allow an employee to use sick and safe time in increments consistent with current payroll practices as defined by industry standards or existing employer policies, provided such increment is not more than 4 hours. The next section also has a change, and this was, again, to kind of correspond to better define how an employer with 6 or more employees, clarifying that they are compensated at the hourly rate that they were scheduled to earn during the time the employee uses their accrued sick and safe time. So that includes some of the added language there, and that was a clarification. In section H, this was also a clarification that was needed, that adding this section H, an employer with 5 or less employees must allow employees unpaid use of accrued sick and safe time. Again, to reflect the partnership recommendations. And then finally, in 40.250, notice and posting, there is a very end addition to the requirement for postings in languages other than English, that employers would do that posting if the poster had been developed and is published by the department, meaning the city. And those are the changes in this bundle of changes. I'm happy if someone wants further discussion or wants to vote on one of these provisions separately. I had just thought, because we have a lot before us, that this might, for these type of changes, to package them together as one might be easier. So I'm looking to see if there is discussion on these changes. And if, okay, there is one. All right, hang on, I gotta. Okay, so we have Gordon, we have Yang. Who else? What? And I've moved it. Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. And somebody else besides Councilmember Yang has to speak. Okay, Councilmember Gordon. People are raising their hands and stuff.
Well, I'm not sure, because the stack here might be for amendments, so I just used my card. But
Thanks.
I really appreciated that you sent this out earlier today, and we had a chance to review all these minor changes. I'm comfortable moving it as a package, and I'm very supportive of it.
Thank you, Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Just quick question related to 40.220H. The piece about an employer with 5 or less employees must allow employees unpaid use of accrued sick and save time. And I guess my question is, isn't the number 6, and so for any that is below 6, I mean, are we trying to regulate them as well? I mean, include them within the umbrella of sick and save time, or what's with, or what's the purpose of item H?
Right. So the purpose of adding H was that I think the intention had been to follow the partnership's recommendations in this area. And my understanding from Ms. Trammell was that she had thought the direction was to follow the recommendations, which did include for the micro employers that they would provide unpaid leave. That's their and be subject to this, but for unpaid leave, and that it was just inadvertently this line was left out. I don't know, Ms. Trammell, if you want to say something, that's fine. If I'm not being accurate here, and I think this was a correction to bring us in, and when Ms. Trammell presented this as well, the date that it was presented, she described this in her narrative as being the recommendation, but then the drafted language did not have the, anyway, the drafted language didn't follow that fully. Ms. Trammell.
All employees, but that those employers with 5 or less employees would only have to provide unpaid leave. So there could be no retaliation against an employee if they use sick time it was unpaid, they couldn't be fired or otherwise retaliated against. And I spoke at that public hearing with the belief that it had made it into that last draft, but it had not. And so this is adding it now. It was my belief that it was in there.
Again, this is why I think you see this under technical as opposed to a separate policy, new policy suggestion. Anything else, Councilmember Yang?
It seems substantive to me, but I'm going to just not say anything more.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And yes, it is, but it was put in here because it was more of a correction to what had been presented as opposed to something that hadn't been discussed and is a new idea. So I agree. All right. Anyone else who wanted to speak on this? Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Just to clarify, in the definition section, you're not adding one regarding the treatment of calendar. I just wanted to make sure that I don't have a duplicative motion at a subsequent occasion.
So say that again, please.
In your definition section,
Yeah.
do you identify? Do you have a motion or an amendment for purposes of a calendar year?
The amendment, so I have heard from our city attorney, and Ms. Trammell wants to come up, that her belief is that by saying calendar without further definition, this will allow an employer to use a 12-month period in, again, a way that is typical with their business practice without us having to kind of specify out all of those ways. We did add in the word fiscal to kind of clarify that a fiscal year could be another way that an employer could do it. And my understanding is that we believe that would be sufficient. We can further clarify as we develop the FAQs, which is similar to what other cities have done. But
Good point, Ms. Trammell. I just want to make sure we're not doing the same thing twice.
Chair, Vice President Glidden, Chair Glidden, and Councilmember Fry. We wouldn't need the word fiscal in there because I believe at a later point in time, Councilmember Fry is bringing a motion to amend to add a definition of calendar year, which is defined as any 12-month period as determined by the employer, which could include a fiscal year or a year calculated on an employee's anniversary date, any of those. So it doesn't distract from being in there, but it could also be removed and it would work just fine.
okay, so it sounds like we're not double doing, and you can do what you like, and we'll take that as it comes up. Thank you, Ms. Trammell. Any other questions, discussion of this package? I'm not seeing any. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Well, I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Vice President. I'd like to separate item 40.220H as a separate motion. Yeah.
All right, so I will remove that as a courtesy and then separately move it so we can vote on that. Any other discussion? Do I need to do anything other than say that? Okay, all right. So as a courtesy, I have taken out from the motion we're voting on 40.220H. We will vote on that separately. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in approval of this motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that is approved. I will now move the change to add 40.220H, which again reads, an employer with 5 or less employees must allow employees unpaid use of accrued sick and safe time. And I'll ask if there's discussion on that motion. All right, seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
All right, and that item is approved. All right, next I think we go back then to who's in queue, and I see Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President.
If we could eliminate that amendment count.
I have a whole packet that you should have received, and I'm going to go through each item here.
Could you please, is it in this larger packet? And if so, could you tell us what page it starts on? Or
Well, it's
It's a separate
It's
packet?
a separate packet that should have been passed out. It begins with the title 40.10, which Councilmember Glidden, I believe you've already altered to eliminate the word paid. Let me know when everybody has it.
I think I
Great.
was talking and they hadn't given it to me.
Okay, so this first motion, Ms. Trammell, I just want to make sure real quick. I believe Councilmember Glidden has already brought the amendment for 40.10, clarifying the title. Okay.
I'll confirm that since I
Okay.
made the motion. That
So
I did.
I will not be on that one. So now I am
Got a
on
little
what
double
should
do
be.
going on.
I am now on what should be page 3, which is section 40.50 under the annual report. I'm going to skip over the second page until it is applicable, which will be a bit later. So section 40.50 designates an annual report that is to be brought to us by the director, probably from the Civil Rights Department. And the amendment is specifically to make sure that following implementation of enforcement of the chapter and how things are going, that we should also include the nature of the violations, the specific violations, the industries and occupations with high rates of violations within that definition. And all this does is it gives us, the council, a little bit more data to determine if what we're doing is working and how it's working.
All right, so Councilmember Fry has moved the change.
So
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to go through all of them,
Oh, you're going to go through all of
if
them?
that works, and then we can pull any of them off.
However you like to do it.
Okay. So that's the first.
You know, Councilmember Fry, I'm actually going to change that. I might ask if we just, since some of yours are more substantive,
That's fair.
I think it might run easier if we just vote on each one and handle it that way.
That works for me. If you don't mind, if I keep going, though, following the vote, just so that I can continue my thoughts.
Oh, sure. You're in queue, and we'll allow you to do your full
Thank you,
packet
Count.
before we move on. So Councilmember Fry has moved this amendment to 40.50. Discussion on that amendment. I'm not seeing any, so all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that is approved. Go ahead, Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Moving to section 40.90, I'm sorry, moving to section 40.120, which is enforcement.
40.120?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the enforcement as well as appellate sections have undoubtedly been the most difficult, technical, and legal to handle. And I really first want to give a huge shout out to Susan Trammell and my staff for staying up late nights working out the logistics on these pieces. So we started from the notion that both the employer as well as the employee should have equal rights of appeal, as well as equal rights to challenge the decision to whatever the next level is. So I'm going to go through each item. First, the first portion of 40.120A has been deleted. It previously said the filing of a report of a suspected violation does not create any right of appeal to the department by the employee or any other person. This would explicitly deny the right of the employee to appeal, and we've deleted that section. In its place, we've outlined the investigative process under B. The department has sole discretion to decide whether to investigate or to pursue a violation of this chapter. If this department decides not to investigate or otherwise pursue a report of suspected violation, the department must provide a written notification to any employee or other person who filed the report. So I'm going to explain, practically speaking, what this is going to look like in terms of enforcement. The employee is going to file a complaint. That complaint will go to the administrator under the department, generally speaking. If the administrator or the department decides that the employee's complaint is not meritorious, they will alert the employee for the reasons that it is not meritorious, and then the employee will have 21 days to challenge that decision up to the director of presumably the Civil Rights Department. The director of the Civil Rights Department will have not seen the complaint prior to this time period. She will then, or he will then make a ruling. If that ruling is, if the decision of that ruling is that there is still no merit, then that decision is final. If they decide to move to that there is merit, then they would move to an investigation. The investigation is to be conducted by the department. Following the completion of an investigation, both the employer as well as the employee will have a right to appeal that decision to an administrative hearing officer. And that is different from an administrative law judge because it will be more of an internal process at our city. So both the employer as well as the employee will have the right to appeal to an administrative hearing officer. And the right of appeal applies solely to the record that is created during the investigation unless the administrative hearing officer decides otherwise. So they can read the record, they can take additional testimony and argument from either the employee/employer and or their representative. And if they deem that it is necessary, they can take additional facts to prevent challenges. Now, following this enforcement process, both parties then have the right to appeal the determination of the administrative hearing officer to the Minnesota Court of Appeals under law. Now, that is part of the next amendment, but I just wanted to lay that out there as far as how this process is going to work. And so I will move my motion under 40.120, which is enforcement.
Okay.
And I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Okay. Councilmember Fry has moved all the changes he has under 40.120 enforcement. Any discussion on that? Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I just wanted to ask a question of Councilmember Fry, if possible, with regards to a matter in which the department decides not to investigate. Why are we excluding an employer from being informed about a decision not to investigate as well? Shouldn't we include the employer in that as well?
Councilmember Yang, I would argue that if there is no decision to further investigate, simply alerting the employer to an additional complaint would only open the employee up to retaliation when no further action is going to take place anyway, so it's not necessary.
And I would argue that an employer has, they have a right to know that a complaint has been filed against them in a situation like that. I mean, I certainly am cognizant of the possibility that there may be, the potential for retaliation. But I mean, if a complaint is filed against an employer, an employer should probably know about the complaint as well.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Yang, I strongly disagree. Simply because if there is no harm, there should be no foul. And in this case, there is no harm, so it doesn't make any sense to then ruin the relationship between the employer and the employee because an investigation was found not to be warranted.
Okay. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take a moment in the sort of middle of a lot of these amendments related to enforcement to thank Councilmember Fry for his leadership and express my strong support for the approach we've taken to enforcement. I think these edits and changes have really strengthened the overall package that we're bringing forward today. We've been in meetings over the past year figuring out how we might enforce what is really a new area of enforcement for our city, and it's a big deal. If anyone wasn't totally following that discussion, that's how I've felt in all of those meetings with Council Members Glidden and Fry, who are both attorneys. But really, the two of them have taken such a lead on developing this language, and particularly in these last month or so, Council Member Fry has been sort of heroic in his efforts to get to this final language. I'm very supportive of the approach he's taken. There were multiple ways to approach enforcement. And I think we've landed on something that's reasonable, that gives parity to the employee and the employer. And I, again, really appreciate the level of attention to detail on this whole package of amendments.
All right. Thank you. Additional discussion, Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In addition to providing parity, it also cuts back on cost because we're choosing to review the record rather than pay for an entire trial, which would take place at the administrative hearing officer. So this is both fiscally responsible as well as equitable. This is the right decision.
All right. I'm not seeing any further discussion. All in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item is approved. Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Moving now forward to the appeal, which I've largely already explained, which is section 40.130. The first change, as you may see, it allows for an employee and or former employee. The reason we've included former employees, if you've been retaliated against, you've subsequently lost your job, then we still want to give that individual the right to challenge. It should have already been apparent, but just in case it wasn't, we wanted to explicitly state so in the ordinance. The remaining section identifies what I've already explained, which is how the appeal officer will be taking the hearings. The appeal officer shall consider the records submitted to it by the department, the written statements and positions by the parties involved, and may, in the discretion of the hearing officer, take testimony to resolve issues of credibility and factual disputes and hear oral arguments. So for those that serve on CDRS, this is very similar to how we review the decision of an administrative law judge. We review that we take the record. If there are factual disputes, certainly we can hear those. But otherwise, it's the hearing officer would be able to do so. And the final significant piece, which is the addition of item number E, which says an employer or employee, to the extent provided by law, may appeal to the hearing officer's decision by petition of writ of cert to the Minnesota Court of Appeals pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 606.01. And again, this allows for appeal under law. And of course, since it's a petition for writ of cert, the judge or the court can certainly decline. So I will move the amendment to section 40.130 under appeals.
All right, Councilmember Fry has moved his set of changes to 40.130 on appeal. Discussion on those proposed changes. Not seeing any. All approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those items are approved. Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Next item is 40.140, which is civil enforcement. This really is just a clarification so that it functions well with the rest of our ordinance. It was a mistake. I'm simply adding the word twice so that it works with the rest of the ordinance, which is where we allow for double and or treble damages. There's no change. There's no practical change here other than to function with the rest of the ordinance. This is just a clerical issue.
Okay, Councilmember Fry has moved that change to 40.140. Discussion? Seeing none. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that is approved. Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Next item is 40.150, which pertains to interest. This is an item that's put in every single Minnesota state statute that pertains to damages. It simply states that if there's an unpaid fee or fine, that interest applies. We're not talking about a lot of money here. This is just regular boilerplate that goes in every single statute. It should be in this one ordinance as well. I move the amendment to 40.150, which is interest.
All right, discussion on Councilmember Fry's motion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item is approved.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Section 40.220, which is use of accrued sick and safe time. I believe this may have already been changed by you, Councilmember Glidden.
Yep.
So scratch that.
Okay.
She's already done it.
And I think you have another after this.
Okay, moving on to item 40.260, which deals with the required statement to the employee. The previous ordinance required that information regarding how much accrued safe or sick time is present to be in the pay stub itself. Many small, specifically minority-owned businesses don't use a pay stub system. So what this does is it's upon request by the employee, the employer must provide in writing or electronically information stating the employee's then current amount of accrued sick and safe time available to the employee and use of sick and safe time. And employers may choose a reasonable system for providing this notification, including but not limited to developing an online system. So rather than mandate, you got to be in the pay stub, we're just making sure that the information is getting to the employee when in fact they request. So I move the amendment to item 40.260.
All right, Councilmember Fry has moved this item. Discussion. Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Just a small question for the author. I wondered if when you say upon request by an employee, comma, should it read an employer or the employer?
It's a fair change. Councilmember Quincy, I would be fine with the.
Thank you.
So I will go ahead and just amend it to say the employer to function with Councilmember Quincy's suggestion.
Councilmember Gordon?
I just have a question about the last sentence where it says employees may choose a reasonable system for providing this notification, including but not limited to, and then you struck the option of putting it on the pay stub and said developing an online system where employees can access their own information. Seems, I don't understand why we had to strike the option of listing it on the pay stub. We're not requiring it to be on the pay stub.
Also a fair point. If we want to add that back in, that's fine. I just want to make sure that that's not the only option. So I will go ahead and add that piece back in, including but not limited to listing information on each pay stub or developing an online system.
Okay, so Councilmember Fry has changed his amendment slightly,
I'm going to wait for the end.
including
Thank you.
allowing back in listing information on each pay stub and changing an and to a the. Any other discussion on this? Councilmember Bender.
Madam Vice President, I was just noting that the clerk seemed to have a question, but I think maybe they don't anymore. Okay.
Okay, so anyone else have discussion or comment on this item? Not seen anyone. All right, the amendment as modified by Councilmember Fry. All in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that item is approved. Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Next item is Section 40.270, dealing with employer records. There's a very minor amendment that is just adding former employees, which is to coincide with instances of retaliation. The only addition that I will make to this one is Councilmember Kano also wanted to be added as an author. And I will move item 40.270.
Okay, so that item has been moved. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, that item is approved. I think you had a couple at the beginning. Did you want to go
Yes.
back to? Okay.
I have two items remaining, and they both somewhat relate together. I'm going to start with item 40.90, which is the effective date. which is effective date. Under item B, it says, for alleged first violations arising during the first 12 months, allowing the effective date of this chapter other than violations of section 40.240. So in other words, what we are doing under this section is during the first year after implementation, we are giving a first opportunity, in which case a warning would just be issued with one major exception, which is instances of retaliation. The reason for excluding retaliation is intentional, unlike other potential instances where they're simply just getting to know the ordinance a little bit better as the employer. I'm going to, so that's the first item on amendment on 40.90. The second one, and by the way, on the first item, well, I'll just say on both of these items, authors are also Fry, Reich, Kano, and Warsami. Item C has to do with new businesses. So as it states, this is for employers other than chain establishments operating in their first 12 months after the date of hire. The employer's first employee are required to, here's what this does. In the first 12 months, the employer, in the first 12 months after the date of hire of a new business's non-chain establishment's first employee, they are required to provide sick time yet not paid time. Following the first 12 months, paid time will need to be instituted, and additionally, there is a sunset of this particular chapter, which is 5 years. We believe that after 5 years, simply providing paid sick time even to new and small businesses will simply become a cost of doing business. So two different chapters here, B and C, both dealing with different things, and I will note that there is a subsequent motion coming from me that deals specifically with the definition of chain establishment. So if you're concerned about that, I would be happy to address that as well.
Councilmember Gordon.
Just trying to understand the intent of the requirement for the first employee to be provided unpaid sick time. That would mean this would apply to businesses of fewer than 6 employees?
Madam Vice President, Councilmember Gooden, yes.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I would just like some additional clarification on how we're defining chain establishments.
Madam Vice President, Councilmember Palmisano, chain establishment is defined under Section 40.30. Chain establishment means an establishment doing business under the same trade name used by 2 or more establishments or under the same ownership and doing the same business, whether such other establishments are located in city or elsewhere, regardless of the type of ownership of each individual establishment. That's my next motion.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had some concerns about this, and I think the details are really important. So I was able to get to supporting this because of the inclusion of a sunset period. And also, we had some back and forth about different approaches to this, whether it be providing unpaid sick time versus looking at different ways of enforcing. And I think this is just a cleaner and more clear way of approaching this subject. So I'm supportive of this amendment.
Okay. I put myself in queue. This is more like maybe a nitpicky thing that
Yep.
we might talk afterwards. So I'm going to support your amendment and including on the definition of chain establishment. I will say I'm not sure that I actually believe it's necessary. It might even in some ways prove a little bit more confusing. There are a lot of ways that employers organize themselves, and I just want to be careful that we're not boxing ourselves into certain ways they organize themselves and then opening an issue with we didn't identify these other ways they organize themselves. I think if you just say employer, and employer includes if they have other locations, then they wouldn't be subject to this. But anyway, that's kind of nitpicky. It's, at the end of the day, I think you've done a great job on this and all your other amendments, and I certainly support the concept and appreciate that you have done all this work to work out these issues. Councilmember Gordon.
So I'm just a little bit confused because in our definition of employer, and I don't think this got amended. An employer means a person or entity that employs 6 or more employees.
That has
So-
been amended, actually, Councilmember Gordon, by me to be
0
one or more.
To 1 or more. So essentially what we're doing with this is we're requiring any new business from the first day they start, if they employ 1 person, to provide them unpaid sick days. And is the understanding that these would be accrued at the same rate as the paid sick days that are referenced in the rest of the ordinance? Or how many, so they wouldn't have to provide them for the first 90 days, but then they would? Because this actually says 12 months after the hire date of the employer's first employee.
Madam Vice President, Councilmember Gordon, there were 2 intentions regarding this this amendment. The first is, as you stated, to allow for sick time, not paid sick time for the new businesses, and the second was for the first 12 years and prior to the sunset. 12 months and prior to the sunset after 5 years following implementation. To not require the paid sick time, so long as it's not a chain.
Councilmember Gordon.
So after 5 years, we wouldn't require the paid sick time?
Correct.
I'm confused.
After 5 years, the provision sunsets and the full ordinance would apply.
I don't know, it's a year period. Anyway. Like Councilmember Fry.
So I'm still confused about what this would actually do. And I'm also confused about how many unpaid sick days they're supposed to provide. Are they accrued at the same rate as the rest of the ordinance that talks about the paid sick days?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you, Councilmember.
How many unpaid sick days are we going to require the employer to provide? In their first 12
after the
months.
sunset or before the sunset?
Before the sunset, in their first 12 months, we say they have to
It's
be,
the same. Yeah,
so they'd be accrued at the same rate.
everything's the same. Yes.
It does say after the hire date. It doesn't say after they've accrued some time.
The hire date applies to the 12-month period